Today is September 24th, 2025, and this is William Michael, the Headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. In this talk, I'd like to provide some tutorial help for students studying Aesop's Fables in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. When we study fables, we always make sure we read the entire fable carefully. We then examine the fable to make sure we understand all the details of what we read about in the fable. Make sure we understand all the vocabulary, are familiar with all the different places or characters or activities described before we attempt to interpret the fable. Then we'll work to identify the moral lesson or one of the moral lessons in the fable. We'll then talk about the characters and why Aesop might have chosen the characters that he did. And lastly, we'll think about modern applications of this fable's moral lesson in our own lives. In this talk, we're going to look at what is fable number 49 in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's course, and the title of this fable is The Sheep Biter. The Sheep Biter. Let's begin by reading the fable together. A certain shepherd had a dog, in whom he placed such great trust that he would often leave the flock to his sole care. As soon, however, as his master's back was turned, the cur, although well fed and kindly treated, used to worry the sheep, and would sometimes kill one and devour a portion. The man, at last, found out how much his confidence had been abused, and resolved to hang the dog without mercy. When the rope was put around his neck, he pleaded hard for his life and begged his master rather to hang the wolf, who had done 10 times as much harm to the flock as he had. That may be, replied the man sternly, but you are 10 times the greater villain for all that. Nothing shall save you from the fate which your treachery deserves. So having read the fable, let's now look at the details to make sure we understand what's going on here. We can say that there are 3, maybe 4 characters to think about in the fable. There's a shepherd, a dog, the sheep, and a wolf. We don't learn about the wolf until the end, but we've got these 4 characters: the shepherd, the dog, the sheep, and the wolf. We read that the dog is referred to as a cur, C-U-R, and what that usually means is a mutt dog, a dog that's a mix of different breeds. It's not a very good dog. It's not some sort of highly trained, purebred shepherd dog. So that might be worth paying attention to. But we read that this shepherd had this dog, and he set him with the sheep to keep them safe. And he cared for the dog. It says that the dog was well fed and was treated kindly. It doesn't say anything about the training that the dog might have needed or would have received. And it does again say that it's a cur, which is usually a negative way to talk about a dog. So there's some interesting detail to think about as we try to interpret the meaning of this fable. But the shepherd left the dog with the sheep because he trusted the dog. He trusted the dog that the dog, at the very least, wouldn't hurt the sheep. He might not be able to save the sheep if a wolf attacked or something like that, but he didn't think that the dog would ever hurt the sheep. And so he left the dog with the sheep. And one of the main reasons why shepherds leave dogs, which are called livestock guardians, with sheep is because the nature of a dog is just to bark and get excited and make noise when anything strange is going on. So if there's an unknown animal on the property, or anything strange at all, people on the property who normally aren't there, dogs by nature bark and make all kinds of noise. They're like an alarm signal. And that's the main use of a shepherd dog. They don't necessarily fight off predators, but they're used to at least give some warning when something strange is going on, especially at night. So anyway, the shepherd left this dog with the sheep, trusting, and that word trust is important, trusting that he would not harm the sheep. And he, again, cared for the dog. The dog was well fed and kindly treated. Unfortunately, whenever the master went away, the dog did the opposite. The dog would bother the sheep, would pick on the sheep, would chase them around, and it says would bite them, and would even go so far as to kill the sheep and even eat part of the sheep. So this was obviously a bad dog. Not that the dog was morally bad, because this is just what some dogs do. But the dog was not worthy of the trust which the shepherd had placed in the dog. And you can imagine the shepherd might have found out that sheep were being injured, sheep were showing signs of being bitten, there were dead sheep found in the field. And the shepherd might be wondering what was going on and might think that there was a predator somehow getting into the field and getting to the sheep. He might not have blamed the dog. But eventually he found out, it says the man at last found out, how much his confidence or his trust in the dog had been abused or taken advantage of. And so he decided that he would put the dog to death. And remember, we're not talking about modern suburban families with pets. We're talking about a shepherd in the ancient world with a dog whose purpose was to protect livestock. And so when he sees that this dog can't be trusted and is not useful, he can't afford to continue caring for and feeding the dog. That's just how farmers tend to think about animals. They see them as, they judge them whether they're useful or not. And so he decides to put this dog to death. And then we read from Aesop that when the rope was put around the dog's neck, the dog pleaded for his life. And he begged his master not to punish him, but to punish the wolf. And he argued that the wolf had done 10 times as much harm to the sheep as he ever did. Why would you punish the dog asks, when the wolf has done so much worse than I have? Why is the wolf allowed to live free and I get put to death? The wolf has done 10 times worse than I have. And the shepherd replies with his answer that you, the dog who was trusted and provided for, well fed and taken care of, that wolf may do 10 times as much harm. But notice he says, you are 10 times the greater villain. You are 10 times more evil than the wolf. Very interesting moral judgment. That wolf may have done 10 times as much bad, but you are 10 times more evil than the wolf. And he says, nothing shall save you from the fate which your treachery deserves. And that word treachery is important. So we can see and understand now the content of this fable. What is the moral lesson? And as I always say, there's not necessarily one and only one moral lesson. There may be a number that we can draw from this fable by meditating on it in different ways. We can think about the dog and look at the story from the perspective of the dog. We can also look at the fable from the perspective of the shepherd. We can think about what this fable teaches the shepherd. We can think about the sheep and ask, what does this fable teach the sheep? We could even ask, what does this fable teach the wolf? So as you meditate on the fables, it's good to meditate on them from different perspectives and think about what the moral lessons might be. But let's look at this moral story here from the perspective of the dog, who seems to be the main character. After all, the fable is titled The Sheep Biter, which refers to the dog. The key words in this fable are trust and treachery. Trust and treachery. Trust is something that is usually given by someone to someone else for an important issue. We trust someone to treat us well. We trust someone not to take advantage of us. We trust someone to respect the things that are valuable to us. So trust is an honorable thing to receive from someone else. It's a sign, as the fable says, that they're putting confidence in us. They're putting faith in us. They're trusting us with something valuable. What was valuable in this fable was the sheep, the flock of sheep. The man was a shepherd. The sheep were everything that he had. They were his wealth. And he put his sheep into the care of this dog. The dog was trusted. Now, it's worth thinking about the wolf, because the dog at the end of the fable says the wolf is 10 times worse than he is. And the shepherd says that's not true. The wolf, by nature, is a predator. The wolf, by nature, kills. Everyone knows that. The farm is set up to keep the wolf out, and the wolf has a hard time getting to the sheep. Everyone knows the wolf. The wolf is kept out. The wolf is not cared for. The wolf is not fed. The wolf is not kindly treated. The wolf is chased. Traps are set for the wolf. And if a man gets any chance, he'll kill that wolf. The wolf is bad. But it's the nature of a wolf to kill. He has a good natural purpose. The dog, on the other hand, is for man. He's a household animal. He's not supposed to kill. He's received into the house. He's a domesticated or a tame animal, not a wild animal like the wolf. The dog is brought into the man's house. The dog is fed and cared for by the man and is trusted to act like a dog. And so the issue here is that the wolf is bad relative to the shepherd, is bad by nature. It's what he does. The wolf is not doing bad things thoughtfully or maliciously. It's just his nature. It's his instinct. The dog, however, is acting contrary to his nature and is actually doing evil. And evil is an important word. To do something bad is to simply do something that another person doesn't want. But to do evil means to break some moral rule, some moral standard. We see the dog acting evil, actually doing what a wolf would do, but doing it as a dog. That's evil. And so the shepherd says to the dog, that may be true that the wolf does a lot of damage and is always to be worried about. But you are 10 times a greater villain. You are evil. and he puts the dog to death. So the dog is an example of someone who violates trust. The dog is a traitor, and the sin that he commits is called treachery. To betray our master is treachery. To be trusted with something very valuable, which is, again, is an honor that we should be very grateful for and we should seek to show ourselves worthy of. To betray the master who cares for us, who treats us kindly, and has placed trust in us, to betray him is one of the worst evils possible. If we read Dante's Inferno, where he talks about the punishment of evil men, the worst of all punishments at the very bottom of hell is this sin, the sin of treachery. At the very bottom of hell, the worst of all sinners in Dante's Inferno is Judas Iscariot. And what did Judas Iscariot do? He betrayed his master. The sin of Judas Iscariot was treachery. And in the Catholic moral system, that sin of betraying one's Lord or one's master is the worst of all sins. And we see Aesop teaching that same lesson here in this fable of the sheep biter. And so if we were to ask what is the moral lesson of this fable, it's to never betray trust. Never betray trust. We could say another moral lesson is to never compare yourself with another, because everyone is judged according to their own situation. To say, well, I'm not as bad as that guy, doesn't make any sense if you live in better circumstances or have greater privileges. So, for example, if you're the oldest child in the family and your parents trust you with certain things that they don't trust your younger brothers and sisters with, and you do something bad, let's say you break something that you're not supposed to be touching, and your parents get upset and you say, well, I don't break as much as little Tommy does. Why don't you punish Tommy? Why are you punishing me? The answer is because what you've done is worse, because to whom more is given, more is expected. You, as the older child, are expected to act better than your younger brother. And so you shouldn't be comparing yourself to someone younger. You should be considering your behavior in light of your privileges, your age, and so on. We see people do this all the time. So treachery is worse than violence. The wolf is violent. The wolf kills, but that's his nature. The wolf is violent, which is bad, but he's not treacherous. The dog here is treacherous, which is even worse than being bad. And what Aesop also teaches here is that sins should be punished differently based on their nature. And again, this is taught in Dante's Inferno. Sin should be punished, or crimes should be punished, based on their nature. What kind of crime it is may be more important than how much damage was done. What kind of crime it is may be more evil than another crime which may have actually done more damage. Because treachery is not only violence, which is bad enough, but it goes beyond violence and also includes the betrayal of trust. actually doing harm to one who has done good to you. Doing harm to one who has done good to you. Another example of this in literature and history comes to us with the Trojan War. If we hear the famous story of the Trojan War and we ask, what was the cause of the Trojan War? It turns out that the Prince of Troy, whose name was Paris, was visiting with the king of Sparta, whose name was Menelaus. And Menelaus had a beautiful wife, Queen Helen. And this prince, Paris from Troy, was received at the house of King Menelaus. Menelaus hosted Paris as his guest. And when a man is welcomed into one's house, he's given a certain level of trust. He's trusted in a man's home. He's trusted around a man's property, around a man's family, and so on. And so being received as a guest is an honor, and it brings with it a certain trust. Paris, being an evil man, chose to lure Queen Helen away from the king and took her back to Troy. The evil that Paris committed was not adultery alone. It was worse than that. It was treachery, because he betrayed the trust that was given to him by King Menelaus. And so the Greeks, rallying around King Menelaus, attacked the city of Troy and burned it to the ground because of the treachery committed by the Prince of Troy, Paris. And so we see there the whole Trojan War was a war over treachery. And so this is the theme of this fable of the sheep biter, the evil of treachery. When you are given trust by someone, you must take it very seriously and honor that trust that you've received. Let's talk about a good application for our own lives. As children, let's say your parents need to go away and do something. They need to go shopping, or they need to go and get work done. And they leave something to your care. They ask you to do something. They leave you at home to babysit your siblings, or they ask you to do something for them. When they ask you to do something like that, they're giving you trust. They're trusting you. If they didn't trust you, they wouldn't ask you to do something important. And so they're showing you trust, and they treat you kindly, they care for you, feed you, educate you, all of this. They do good to you, and they put you in a position of trust. And you should take that very seriously, because that's a test of your moral character. And you should seek to honor your father and your mother by always being trustworthy, proving yourself worthy of their trust. That's what it means to honor your father and your mother. And when they walk away, when they're not present, remember it said that when the master's back was turned, the dog would do evil. When your parents are not watching, your character is tested. Obedience is a kind of faithfulness, loyalty. Your parents who care for you, whose children you are, tell you to do something, ask you to do something, entrust something to your care. And you respond with obedience, which is honorable and reasonable, or with disobedience, which to a degree is treacherous, because you're trusted as a member of the family, as a son or daughter. You're trusted. And so you may think to yourself and say, well, I'm not as bad as other kids. I'm not as bad as those kids across the street, or I'm not as bad as those kids in the public schools. I hear all kinds of terrible stories about those kids. Those kids may be violent. Those kids may be thieves. But you are trusted by your parents, and therefore your bad deeds are worse than theirs, because your bad deeds include a kind of treachery, especially in a situation where you've been trusted with something. So a good application of this fable in your own life is to say to yourself, when I'm entrusted with something, I'm going to prove myself worthy of that trust. I'm going to be trustworthy. When I'm given something to look after, when I'm asked to do a certain job, when I'm trusted with something that my parents value, I'm going to honor them and fulfill that trust that they give me. I'm going to please them and prove myself trustworthy. And to do that, you have to act virtuously when no one is watching. When the master turned his back, the dog did evil and betrayed him. And you know how difficult it is, or how easily we're tempted to do bad things when our parents turn their backs. So a good application of this lesson is to learn to be faithful in things that are trusted to you, to not be treacherous, to be reliable, to be trustworthy, to be faithful, to be honest, to be loyal. These virtues all relate to this vice, this sin of treachery. Now, as for the characters of the fable, why would Aesop choose these characters to teach this lesson? A shepherd and a dog, sheep and a wolf. The shepherd can't be with the sheep all the time. And sometimes he has other work to do and he needs someone to help. Now, obviously, he could find men to help him, but that's very expensive. And the value of the sheep and the budget of the farm and what it costs to do things and what the sheep are worth, those things all determine what options a shepherd has. And so farmers usually, when they can, use certain animals whose nature it is to do certain tasks. And as I said before, a dog is very helpful on a farm, not because it's smart, not because it's reasonable, not because it understands what's going on, but because the dog's natural reactions to things are helpful to the shepherd or to the farmer. Just being alerted that something strange is going on out in the field may be all that the shepherd needs. It allows him to pay attention to other work and know that the dog is out in the field, and if there's any trouble, the dogs will start barking. So you can see how the farmer will trust a dog, and we can see that that's an important part of this lesson. Dogs live with people. They're called man's best friend. The man cares for and treats this dog kindly. The dog probably lives in the man's house or on the man's front porch, whatever. It's welcome, close to the house, around the children, around the sheep, and so on. The dog is expected to work for the man's good, to work for his master's good. That's normal. That's what dogs do. The wolf is known to be evil and is kept out. The wolf has to kill to survive. He lives outside the fences, away from the house. He's not trusted. He's hated by the people and kept far away. He lives a very hard, difficult life. And so Aesop uses these characters, especially because the people reading the fables are familiar with the life of a shepherd and the work of sheepdogs. They probably have good dogs themselves, and they can imagine how upsetting it would be to find out that your dog was actually the one causing the trouble. And so we can see why these characters, the shepherd, the dog, the sheep who are innocent and gentle and unable to protect themselves, they provide us with good characters to teach this lesson, and I've explained how they do so. So that brings our study here of this fable of the sheep biter to an end. Remember, we can continue meditating on this. We can think about the shepherd and say, is it a good idea for a shepherd to entrust his sheep to a dog? The dog is not reasonable. Dogs don't always do what they should. So maybe the shepherd is worthy of some criticism here. Maybe the moral lesson is to be very careful that you don't trust valuable things to others who are not worthy of that trust. We can see that there's more to this moral lesson than just the lesson about treachery. It could also be a lesson about being careful who you trust. We could also look at it from the perspective of the sheep and realize that you can't trust someone who's put over you in a position of trust to care for you. You've got to learn to be careful for yourself, or you've got to work together to protect one another, because you may not be able to fight off a wolf, or you may not be able to fight off a dog, but if the sheep could somehow stick together, maybe they could help one another. So we could think about the fable from the perspective of the sheep. We could also think of it from the perspective of the wolf and say that a life of sin and violence, a life of crime, is not a happy life. And even though you may get away with it, you live a lonely, hateful life. And the life of a dog is much better than the life of a wolf. And Aesop teaches that in another fable. So you can see there's lots of different moral messages we can draw from these fables by meditating on them, by thinking about all the details. But for our lesson, we're going to focus on what I think is the main moral lesson, which has to do with betraying trust, which is treachery. And we're warned of the evil of treachery. And we need to be especially concerned with treachery because this applies spiritually as well. God entrusts us with very valuable things, even our own soul, the souls of other people around us. God entrusts these valuable things to us. And we should honor the Lord in our behavior. When our Lord doesn't seem to be present, it seems like he's not around. We can be tempted to betray our trust and do evil. We can take this amazing soul that he's given us and destroy it by sin. We can destroy it by thinking that no one is looking and doing bad things, hurtful things against the will of God, who made us and who provides for us, who cares for us, who offers us eternal life, who gives us all of the amazing gifts that he's given to us as human beings, and we can use them for evil. And when we do that, we betray our trust and commit a kind of treachery. Think of Adam and Eve in the garden, betraying the Lord who gave them the whole garden, gave them life, told them they could eat anything they wanted, and gave them one rule to follow. And they chose to betray God and become friends with the serpent. That's an example of treachery. And we're always tempted to become traitors and dishonor the Lord. And we need to learn to be faithful, to prove ourselves faithful, to persevere to the end, and prove to not only to God, but to ourselves and everyone around us that we love God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all our strength, and we will be faithful to him, even to the death as Christ was. So you can see lots of moral lessons, lots of applications, but I hope that's helpful to get you thinking about this fable. I look forward to seeing what you have to say, what you have to write about, and if you need any further help, please let me know. God bless.